Welcome to the South Central Texas Winter Climate Webinar. My name is Larry Hopper with the National Weather Service Office in New Braunfels, Texas. And as you can see, we've had quite the week this week. We've gone from 85 degrees, which set record highs in Austin, Camp Mabry and Bergstrom here at the office, to a rain-snow mix with some accumulations that actually did occur over portions of the Everest Plateau and Rio Grande Plains, as you can see from this picture on your right. So, make sure this works. There you go. One thing to kind of point out is that we have not really had a widespread freeze over most of South Central Texas. The area that was outlined here in the yellow counties did actually see a pretty significant freeze in late October, and it was fairly widespread in those counties. There are some areas outside of those counties that did have a less significant, very brief freeze, but for the most part, most other counties have not seen one. So just want to pass along that we most likely will have a widespread freeze tonight across most of our region. We want to pay attention to the products we put out here in the next couple of hours pertaining to that. One kind of big blessing we've had over the past couple of days is that we've gotten quite a bit of rainfall. As of 6 o'clock this morning, you can see that with the greens and the yellows, and even some areas that are in the orange here, we've had widespread 1 to 2 inches almost over the entire region. The areas further south that have not seen that probably will have seen that by the time we look at rainfall totals later tonight, and some also precipitation totals, considering we have had snow over portions of our western area. This is actually, if we had 2 inches, that's pretty standard normal precipitation for December for most of our region. Of course, further west, it's even less than that. But almost the entire region did get 50% of their normal rainfall or precipitation snow-wise for December and here in the last 48 hours. But overall, we've been very, very dry. If we had not had this precipitation and had I done the webinar just a few days ago, you would have seen that we would have been more along the lines of 25 to 60% on average drier than normal. Right now, we're about 50 to 75% drier than normal over the last 90 days. The one exception is really we had some very heavy precipitation here in southern parts of our Rio Grande Plains. Here in Dimmitt County, we actually had some locations that approached 15 to 20 inches. But everywhere else, we, for the most part, even here in the coastal plains here in Karnes County, where they typically get, at least 3 or 4 inches a month in fall, they only got about 2 to 4 inches in some locations out there, with most of South Central Texas getting anywhere from about 6 to 10 inches or so, which is still a decent amount below normal. If you look at our 180-day rainfall, you still see the signal from Hurricane Harvey in there, and that's going to continue until we get at the end of February. By the time we get to the next webinar in March, you'll see that disappear. But for the most part, areas that did not get a precipitation from Hurricane Harvey or the heavy rainfall event that we had in late September are generally below normal from a precipitation standpoint. Therefore, it's not surprising that we have had a pretty rapid expansion of drought over the last handful of weeks, particularly during the month of November. If you look up here on November 14th, in the middle of the month, we started to see some developing dry, of course, short-term dry conditions here in the coastal plains. But these drier conditions up here in the western hill country, portions of the Everest Plateau, are actually a little bit more long-term. They extend even before Harvey, because those areas really did not get that much rain from that particular hurricane. And so if you look just even mid-October, we had 46% of Texas in general being abnormally dry, but only 16% was in drought. But now in the past 3 weeks, that's really even 2 weeks, really. By November 28th, we were almost at 37% drought as it was. If you take a look, we do have a couple very spotty locations that are in severe drought over Bandera County, portions of Llano County, and Lavaca County. We'll have to evaluate that next week, depending on how much precipitation has fallen, but most likely we'll still, even with this rainfall, have some degree of drought over our region. As you take a look at the drought outlook, you can see that the winter drought outlook actually, which was done back in mid-November, we did not have drought in the coastal plains, did forecast development of drought, which has already come true in some locations, whereas the December drought outlook indicated that drought would develop. Probably some of these areas that have not seen drought develop, they may struggle to get drought until towards the end of the month at least, because the rains we're having right now. But again, we're not really expecting as you're going to see a lot of rainfall as we go through the rest of winter. So this may end up being the most significant precipitation event we have over the next 3 months, unless we get some luck, which did happen to some extent last year. So again, the key take-home message here is that drought over the hill country and coastal plains will likely expand and may even intensify this winter. And then, of course, the typical culprit for this is La Nina, and our East Pacific sea surface temperatures are supporting a weak La Nina at the current moment. The Nino 3.4 region here in the East Central Pacific is the one that matters, and you can see that our September to November fall 3-month average for the Oceanic Nino Index was negative 0.7 degrees Celsius, which is just about a degree and a half Fahrenheit. And so when you take a look at that, we only have to be below 0.5 degrees Celsius, or about a degree Fahrenheit below the normals out there for at least 5 3-month periods. We just had our first 3-month period, and as you're going to see, most forecasts are suggesting that we'll have that criteria met. It's even stronger when you go further east along the closer to the coast of South America. We've got temperatures that are well below a degree Celsius in both the Nino 3 and Nino 1.2 regions. One thing to kind of indicate as well is that last year we had an event that was where the cool waters were mostly concentrated over these central Pacific portions of the equatorial Pacific, whereas this year they're more traditional La Nina signal, where we're seeing the cold upwelling waters off the coast of South America that have really developed in a more traditional sense, what we typically see during La Nina. And as a result, we are seeing a lot more traditional atmospheric response than what we had last year in terms of the actual atmospheric circulation, which has really caused us to be locked into a pretty standard weather pattern you'll see here in a second. So this again, unlike last year where the atmospheric signal was not completely there, this year it appears to be. And so CPC has issued a La Nina advisory that's now in effect all the way and through at least probably the end of the winter, if not even parts of the spring. But dynamical models, as you can see up here in the yellow line, actually are predicting a stronger La Nina than the statistical models, which is a green line that is hovering right about the threshold. So statistical models typically are not quite as skillful as their dynamical models, which is another reason why you're seeing people really at CPC predict that we're going to have a La Nina. That's going to be probably at least possibly even a lower end of moderate, and they are showing a 65 to 75% chance of late persisting through this winter. Just one quick reminder, make sure if you did join late to make sure that try to do it real quick. So moving forward, now we'll go back to this. How does La Nina affect our weather? If you looked at the weather too much, as a lot of us do over the past several weeks, you've seen that really this pattern has really manifested itself maybe a little bit further east than what it's shown in the picture. But generally, you have a ridge over the Pacific Ocean and over the western third of the country, which is one reason why you're seeing some of the really warm conditions in Southern California that are contributing, in addition to the winds the fires are seeing there. Then you have kind of what we call a northwest flow at upper levels that comes off the Rockies, and then you have a trough over the eastern part of the country. So for the vast majority of at least the last several weeks, we've seen this pattern where the storm track has been displaced well to the north, keeping most of the rainfall and in this case snowfall well to the north with it. The subtropical jet has not been very active, but over the past couple of days, we did see some breakdown of this pattern where we did get a trough over the western half of the country, quickly move through, and now that's what's given us the precipitation, even some light snow in portions of our western counties today and overnight. Again, this particular pattern is probably not going to be enough to break this down permanently. We're probably going to return to this kind of pattern, but because we do have repeated shots of cold fronts with this type of pattern, we will probably have a hard time getting too much above normal temperature-wise for the next several days. But when you're in this pattern, a lot of times, as we've seen already, the really strong cold air masses really stay off, and Arctic air masses really stay off toward north and east. And so even though we may continue to see this northwest flow off to keep us dry, the possibility of us having really cold temperatures for any extended period of time is not very likely. And so how does La Nina affect our weather? You can see that for the winter period for December, January, and February, it typically is drier and warmer than normal during La Nina more than half the time. This is a map that CPC has put out that is also adjusted for the trend. you can see very clearly that Texas is pretty much bone dry most of the time during La Nina years, which holds anywhere from 50 to 90% of the time. And that trend holds even greater the further south you go into Texas. So some parts of our southern areas almost certainly 70 to 80% of the time have that trend. The temperature trend is a little bit weaker. We tend to be slightly above normal. You can make the argument that our low temperatures are sometimes a little bit below, but our high temperatures tend to be higher because we do have probably more days in general with clearer skies than cloudier skies. Of course, the freeze days I think I showed last year don't really change much. As you saw last year, we only had, I think, about 4 freeze days over the I-35 corridor, but a couple of them we had freezes close to 20 degrees. And so we do get a freeze that could actually be fairly hard at times, but for the most part, we will probably see an average number of freeze days. And again, this trend does not hold nearly as often and consistently across the state as precipitation does, but as you saw with precipitation, the trend does increase the further, at least the consistency of the trend does increase the further south you go in the state. And so even though we have had this pretty recent cold, rainy period for the last couple of days, once we get past the next 5 days, obviously we're going to dry out here pretty quickly later tonight in the overnight hours, and we probably won't see rain for at least the next couple weeks of any significance or frozen precipitation. When you look at the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day temperature outlooks, you do see that there is a little bit of a transition from conditions that are probably going to be around normal, or there's not a strong tilt towards above or below normal odds for at least the middle part of next week, and then by next weekend into the early part of the following week, we should start to see the odds tilted more towards above normal temperatures. Of course, this is partly due to the fact that that tropical low pressure did kind of weaken the ridge briefly that was bringing us our warm weather, but that ridge should reassert itself and gradually slide to the east, with the troughs becoming further and further displaced to the east as time goes on. The 3 and 4 week outlooks, one reason I wanted to point this out, even though I will admit that the 3 and 4 week outlook did not get the current rainy period that we have 3 or 4 weeks ago, this has been pretty good for temperature this year. And they have, CPC has converted this to an operational product for temperature, so it's no longer experimental. But for precipitation, I still caution you when you're looking at this product to be aware that this is an experimental product for precipitation, mainly because the skill is not quite ready yet for the Climate Prediction Center to make that operational. They're still kind of tweaking it and figuring some things out. But again, as you see, once you get to the second half of December, we're once again looking at warm and dry conditions, or at least the odds tilted towards those. And again, one thing to point out about this is, whereas the other outlooks tend to use 3 categories, so they have above, below, and near normal categories, this actually only has 2 categories of above or below normal. If you don't see a forecast for above or below normal, what they're saying is that there just is not good skill or good confidence to go either way on the forecast. And one reason to kind of explain this for temperature is that this is probably equal chance, because they're not quite sure where the ridge and where the trough pattern will set up pretty persistently. If it's a little bit to the east, then that would slide to the east. If it's a little to the west, that would slide a little bit further west. So they're accounting for that uncertainty. When you look at the long term, you're going to see more of the same. This is going to match a lot of what you expect during La Nina. For precipitation, it's still possible that we could see below normal precipitation for some spots after this rain event if we did not get any precipitation for the rest of the month, which is not completely out of the question. But of course, many locations will probably be at least close enough to that middle third where they'll probably end up being near normal for the month of December. Of course, as we go through the whole winter, we will most likely have a strong tilt towards odds being below normal precipitation-wise. And again, last year, had we not had a wet first week of December, it probably would have turned out that way for most locations, instead of having some near normal and some below, and even a few spots that were above because of that first week of December last year. When you look at December temperature, you can see that for this particular month, we have an equal chance, partly due to the current cold snap that we're having, and then it's probably going to take some time to adjust out of that and get the ridge trough pattern a little bit further east, although more likely than not, we may actually have a little bit better chance for above normal temperatures this month and below. But certainly as we get into December through February, we have a very strong tilt towards odds being for above normal temperatures, 50% chance actually for being in that top third group. And so considering we're pretty cool right now, this is a pretty significant indicator that you should plan on January and February being warmer than it normally is. Just to kind of give you a sense of what does fewer precipitation, less precipitation mean. Really, the big reason is because we don't get those weather systems through here as often because we are locked in that kind of northwest flow pattern aloft. Therefore, we typically only get precipitation events on average about 1 to 2 days a week, but they're very, very, very minimal mostly. You do not see heavy precipitation events with totals greater than ½ inch very often. And so for Del Rio, they tend to only have one for each month. San Antonio might have, sorry, this is for winter in general, so just one for the whole winter. San Antonio might have two, and Austin might have three. And so for each case, it would not be unreasonable to think this will be our only heavy precipitation event for this month. And climatologically for Del Rio may be the only one for this particular La Nina episode. So we'll have to wait and see what happens here, but that is something to keep in mind, that typically in other years we have more heavy precipitation events in winter, more regular precipitation than we get during La Nina. The snowfall pattern also changes dramatically, and I know that we don't show a great amount of interest in this because this does not tend to occur here very often, even though it has occurred in our western counties to some extent today. But what you can see is that for areas that get at least a foot of snow each year, during a strong or a weak La Nina event, during the weak La Nina events, you can see that there is actually greater snowfall that occurs over the northern plains, the Pacific Northwest, and the northeastern United States. But there's actually less snowfall that occurs in the southern Rockies and the Plains states. And so what this means is that because you have that ridge and you have the trough that's over here, there could actually be a little bit unknown, but there could be some sort of feedback that does kind of keep that pattern in place, because you do have probably colder temperatures up in the region that will support fronts coming through, whereas here further south, you're not going to have snow, as much snow as you usually would in the ground, which may actually have a little bit of a temperature increase effect. And so this is something that might actually have some effect on keeping our temperatures up during La Nina winters, because we don't tend to have as much snowfall immediately to our north. And of course, the stronger the La Nina event, the more the storm track shifts further north. And so if we tended to have a more moderate event than a weak event, we might see this pattern shift even further north, which would give us higher confidence to have warm temperatures. But the other thing to kind of notice is that because we do have a lot of snow cover typically up in the northern plains during this time of year, if we do get the right orientation of the trough, we can get a pretty significant cold front through here. And we did see that a couple times last winter. Measurable snow, of course, is less likely during La Nina. Of course, it can still happen, as we have seen today. But at our major climate sites, going back to 1950, you can see that there's a slight decrease for Austin, Camp Mabry, and for San Antonio, and a more significant decrease for Del Rio, believe it or not. But typically, we tend to see snow every 3 to 5 years across the region. During La Nina, you can expect one to occur every 4 to 7 La Nina winters. But having said that, the record-breaking snow event for most of our area, and actual the record-breaking season, is 1984-85, which of course was a La Nina event. And so just kind of reiterate that, last year we put this together for FEMA, as many offices did. You can see that January 12th to 13th, 1985 event is the snow event of record for almost half of our counties. The snow event of record is generally 9 to 12 inches, so that'd be kind of your worst case scenario. But of course, if you're in the coastal plains, your worst case scenario is closer to 6 inches, and at least the one that we've seen observed. In the hill country, it could be closer to 18 inches based on things we've seen observed throughout the past. And of course, that 18-inch total did occur during that 1985 event. Just kind of give you something to look forward to. I know many of you have been waiting for our climate tables to come back online, and we're very close to putting them out there. Just showing you an excerpt of them, that we do have all the snow events. I've been working with NCEI to try to get these into Examasis for you to have it in now data. But as you can see, we've had 49 measurable snowfall events for Austin since the late 1800s, and 38 for San Antonio. The earliest snowfall actually was in October of 1993. We had over an inch at Del Rio that day. We actually had a trace of San Antonio as well, and we actually had that across a lot of Texas and Oklahoma, which is the earliest snowfall for many locations in the region. Latest snow that's measurable is actually March 27th of 1930 in Austin, and the latest trace was kind of a rogue event that actually did produce some snow in parts of Houston back on Easter weekend of 2007. But again, most events occur in January and February. That's when, and also December, as you've seen today. But the kind of range of possibilities would be late October to late March. And so just to kind of summarize for winter weather, obviously we'll go normal for December through mid-January based on what's happening today. what we could see happening a couple days ago. But for the second half of winter, just based on our climatological pass-through La Nina, we're going to go as below normal. For severe weather, we just don't have a lot of opportunities looking forward ahead in the forecast to get strong waves that could produce severe weather. So we're going to go below normal for December through mid-January. But again, like you saw last year, we did have a pretty significant tornado outbreak with a QLCS system in mid-February that was right along the I-35 corridor. And so that was consistent with the fact that we tend to have more severe reports during La Nina than we have in ENSO neutral years, but less than we have in El Nino, simply because we don't have as many opportunities for precipitation. We do tend to have fewer watches for strong La Ninas until February, and then that trend reverses, which is what we saw last year. And just as a preview for spring, we tend to have more severe weather in spring during La Nina years as well. So that's something to pay attention to for the future. And of course, stronger and longer track tornadoes can be possible during the wintertime, as Ashton Cook and his colleague did back in 2008. So that's something he's not currently at SPC. So that's something to keep in mind as well. For fire weather, I cannot stress enough how much these recent rains have helped our situation, but we're still going to stick with normal because of the likelihood that we're going to have a number of dry fronts come through, and the fact that we probably won't have much precipitation for the next several weeks, at least for the rest of this month, indicates that fields eventually should dry. The grass will be cured after this next freeze. And so as we move into mid-January through February, you can see from the significant wildland potential fire outlook that we do have above normal conditions for not just the northern parts of our region, but most of the south central plains. And so that's going to be a tremendous concern moving forward if we do not get another precipitation event or two like the one we just had. And then for flooding, the majority of our wettest winters tend to occur during El Nino, as you know, but the rest occur in ENSO neutral fairly equally, and based on what we're seeing moving forward, our risk of flooding for this particular winter is not too great. Typically, it's not great in winter in general, but during El Nino year, it could be. And just kind of point out for the spring outlook, most likely, because of the schedule, will most likely be Thursday, March the 8th at 2 p.m. And we'll talk about what weakening La Nina conditions mean for severe weather threat in particular, and also our flash flood threat. As you can see, CPC is still showing towards above normal temperatures and drier than normal conditions for precipitation standpoint. But that's a little bit misleading because that may just mean we have a lot more of our water locked up in severe hail. So just keep that in mind. So if you have any questions about the webinar before we get to additional things, go ahead and take them now. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, just let me know.